Welcome to the Sky Commander Flight Brief. It's your mission-ready podcast for drone pilot training and aerial insights across Canada.
From Transport Canada rules to real-world drone ops, we break it down, take you higher, and help you earn your wings. Because here at skycommander.ca, we don't just fly.
It hints there's more to it. It's a masterclass, a deeper level, maybe a philosophy or a community focus, perhaps.
It's definitely intriguing, sets them apart from just, a basic tips show. Skycommander.ca is the obvious next step. Precisely. If you're thinking about flying a drone in Canada, boom, this content is aimed right at you.
Powered by skycommander.ca.
The elite podcast for Canada's drone pilot. Okay, let's get started. Today, we're tackling a topic that has historically been buried under mountains of red tape. Getting the green light to fly drones for complex, really crucial missions. We are deep diving into the new standardized FAA processes. These are designed to, solve a years-long backlog, expedite crucial public safety approvals, and fundamentally change how thousands of agencies operate in the national airspace.
Yeah, and the old system, particularly for public safety entities looking for these authorizations, it was a real administrative quicksand.
Right.
It was notoriously slow, incredibly inconsistent, and frankly, it created immense confusion in the field, right in the middle of emergencies.
I can imagine.
Our source material details this massive, and I'd say necessary, regulatory shift. We're moving away from these case-by-case, kind of vague requests for capabilities, like just asking for DFR authorization.
Right, just a blanket term.
Exactly. And moving toward a simplified, standardized, almost pre-approved package that's focused on waiving specific federal regulations. This whole pivot is really about scaling up both safety oversight and operational utility across the country.
And we've got some incredible source material for this. We have detailed transcripts from those key FAA webinars that rolled out this new policy, some internal policy documents that really clarify the eligibility, and a fascinating side-by-side comparison with our neighbors to the north.
The Canadian rulebook.
Exactly, analyzing the differences there. So for you, the listener, what we're providing today is the complete roadmap to the new certificates of waiver authorization, or what many in the industry, probably tired of saying all those acronyms, are playfully calling the CAWA.
Our mission today is to give you a really comprehensive understanding of this new Part 91 Public Safety Certificate of Waiver Authorization, the CAWA. We'll detail who's eligible, the pretty profound operational benefits that come with it, and connect these critical U.S. changes to the broader global regulatory evolution, especially when you compare it to Canada's performance-based Part 9X rules.
Okay, let's unpack this shift because the terminology alone can be a minefield. You have Certificate of Authorization, or COA, and Certificate of Waiver, COW. What's the real operational distinction, and why is this new CAWA model centered on the waiver, the COW?
That is the essential starting point. Historically, public safety organizations, they sought a Certificate of Authorization, a COA, which just granted permission to operate.
Okay.
Now, the emphasis is firmly on the Certificate of Waiver, the COW. The distinction is subtle, but is critical. A COA simply grants authority. A COW grants relief from a specific rule.
So you're deviating from the standard.
Exactly. And crucially, they are both issued on the same FAA form, the 7711-1, which is why the name CAWA, K-A-W-A, has stuck. It includes both concepts. The new process centers on the COW because the goal is rapid, standardized deviation from standard aviation rules when conducting these public safety missions.
And what was the fundamental regulatory problem the FAA was facing before this change? It wasn't just slow. It sounds like there was no standardization at all.
That's it, exactly. The problem was regulatory narrowness and just inefficiency. The old COAs were almost always only waiving one single regulation, Title 14 CFR 91.113.
The famous see and avoid rule.
The one everyone knows. Yeah. And if a department needed to deviate from other rules, like, say, flying close to clouds or operating at night above 400 feet, which happens all the time in search and rescue,
right,
they had to file separate waivers. It created this immense complexity and inconsistency across different jurisdictions.
So the CAWA is the solution to that narrowness. Instead of waiving one rule, this new standardized Certificate of Waiver template waives 9 regulations all at the same time.
Simultaneously.
Can you give us a flavor of which rules are being packaged together for this immediate relief?
Yeah, this is where the operational benefit truly shines. So, beyond 91.113, see and avoid, which enables BVLOS with mitigation, the new CAWA package includes waivers for rules that are critical to emergency response.
Okay, like what?
For instance, It waives key portions of 91.117, which dictates right-of-way rules. It acknowledges that an unmanned public safety aircraft might need to operate contrary to standard manned aircraft priority during a rapidly unfolding event.
That makes sense.
It also addresses 91.119, the minimum safe altitude requirements, allowing responders to fly much lower than the typical 500-foot distance above people or property when it's necessary.
And what about weather? That's always a huge factor.
And perhaps most importantly, for challenging weather environments, it waives parts of 91.155, the visual flight rules, or VFR, minimums regarding cloud clearance and visibility.
So what does that mean in practice?
It means a police drone tracking a suspect or a fire drone assessing a blaze can operate when a manned aircraft would be totally grounded due to VFR minimums.
That immediately sounds like an answer to the backlog. I mean, the old CAPS process, the COA online application system, it was a genuine administrative nightmare. I understand it could take months, sometimes even years, to approve requests that were, in the end, deemed low risk.
The old CAPS system was a bottleneck the FAA just couldn't sustain. And for public safety, a delay of months is a delay of safety. It's that simple.
Absolutely.
The FAA essentially had to reinvent the review process. The new system is designed specifically to accelerate approvals by focusing on these template-driven submissions. We've seen reports of the most standardized applications being approved in weeks, and in some rare, optimal cases, within 3 days.
Wow.
The paradigm shifted from prove your safety case from scratch to prove you fit our pre-approved safety template.
That is a fundamental operational change. But who exactly qualifies for this highly expedited combination waiver? I understand there are 2 specific eligibility gates that have to be passed concurrently.
That's correct. You have to pass both Gate 1 and Gate 2. So Gate 1, public aircraft status, Part 91. The organization has to meet the statutory definition of a public aircraft, which is defined in U.S. Code 49 U.S.C. 40102 subparagraph 41.
Okay, so that's the legal status that lets them bypass the strict commercial rules of Part 107.
That's the first hurdle, and then Gate 2 defines the nature of the entity's mission.
Which is?
You must also be a public safety organization, PSO, as defined in the most recent FAA Reauthorization Act.
I see the regulatory strategy there. It's a subset of a subset. Not all governmental or public aircraft are going to qualify as a PSO.
And that distinction is crucial. You could have, say, a county's tax assessor's department. They decide to buy a drone to survey property values. They might technically meet the public aircraft definition under Gate 1, but they are not engaged in activities related to the safety and well-being of the general public.
Right. They're not law enforcement, fire safety, or search and rescue.
Exactly. The FAA is strategically enabling the entities that respond to immediate threats to life and property with this rapid approval path.
So once an entity confirms they pass both gates, how do they navigate this streamlined application process? How do they avoid that old 20-page operational manual requirement?
The process is, remarkably simplified. Step 1. You send an email to the specified FAA address. In that email, you have to explicitly identify yourself as both a public aircraft and a public safety organization, and state your interest in the 91.113 waiver template.
Okay, pretty simple.
And then the FAA sends back a comprehensive packet. This thing includes a checklist, a sample public declaration letter to prove Gate 1, a sample PSO letter to prove Gate 2, the blank FAA Form 77112, and, importantly, the CMD-DAA.
Let's pause on that. The CMD-DAA criteria for making determinations for detect and avoid. That sounds incredibly technical. What is it, practically? Is it a standard, a checklist, or some complex methodology?
It's essentially a standardized methodology and a checklist, and it's specifically designed for public safety. It defines what constitutes sufficient mitigation for BVLOS operations within this defined risk envelope.
So it's the FAA's safety case, prepackaged.
Exactly. It ensures that the organization has considered all the critical failure modes and possesses a documented operational safety protocol. Instead of having to invent a safety case from the ground up, the CMD-DAA provides the structure that the FAA's safety team is already comfortable signing off on.
And the concept of operations, the CONOPS, the document that historically buried departments in administrative work.
That's the real relief valve here. While conopacy is still required by regulation for these standardized template-driven waivers, the document only needs to be a couple of paragraphs. Just describe the mission type in the area of operation. It deliberately avoids the old requirement of submitting a comprehensive 20-page operational manual, which was a major administrative barrier for smaller departments.
So the strong advice for any public safety team that might be stuck in the old queue right now.
If you are currently waiting in CIPS for a standard waiver, abandon it. Seriously.
Yeah.
The CIPS system is defunct for these new CAWA applications. You are strongly advised to start over with the new email process. Not only will you get faster approval, but you will immediately gain access to the new benefits, including the longer duration and reduced reporting, which were unavailable under the old model.
Okay, let's elaborate on those operational benefits. The CAWA isn't just about speed, it's also about stability and administrative relief.
Precisely. First, the duration. The new certificate of waiver is approved for 4 years, a full 48 months.
4 years is a long time in the drone world.
It's a massive commitment from the regulator. It guarantees operational security and stability for nearly half a decade. Any organizations with existing COAs, which might only have 1 or 2 year terms, should immediately resubmit under the new CIW just to gain this extended term.
And the regulatory bodies have also cut down on reporting requirements, which I know is one of the biggest complaints from resource-strapped departments.
That's right. The mandatory requirement for filing NOTAM's notice to air missions, that goes away entirely under the new CIW, which is a major time saver.
Huge.
Furthermore, the mandatory monthly reporting requirements have been significantly reduced. They're now focusing only on incidents, not just compliance logs. And there's even a strong internal push to potentially remove these reporting requirements entirely in future CAWA versions, mirroring how the FAA reduced requirements for standardized Part 107 waivers.
So shifting from compliance tracking to just incident reporting.
The FAA's goal is to transition away from compliance tracking reports and focus solely on documenting accidents, incidents, and mandatory near-midair occurrences.
This last benefit is perhaps the most practical for a pilot who's actually responding to an emergency integrated airspace authorization.
This is arguably the biggest technical efficiency improvement. The new form is a twofer. It includes pre-approved airspace authorization right up to the UAS facility map, or UAS-FM grid altitude.
Okay.
This single document covers operations in nationwide Class G airspace and controlled airspace Class B, C, D, and E up to whatever that grid height is, which is often 400 feet AGL.
We should probably clarify the term UAS-FM grid altitude. For many Part 107 pilots, they think of the grids as the specific ceilings they get through LAANC. What does UAS-FM grid altitude mean in practice for a public safety officer with this CAWA?
It means that if the UAS-FM grid over their police station says the maximum altitude is 400 feet, their CAWA automatically authorizes them to fly up to 400 feet without seeking any additional permission.
So no separate app, no call to the tower?
Nothing. They don't need to use a separate app or call the tower every time. It's pre-approved based on the published grid ceiling for that specific area.
And this brings us to a crucial distinction regarding controlled airspace access. The CAWA uses a different legal mechanism than commercial drones do.
That is absolutely essential to understand because this is a Part 91 waiver for a public aircraft operation. Traditional LANC, the low altitude authorization and notification capability, is not used for airspace authorization.
Right, LAANC is only for Part 107.
It's exclusively an automated tool for Part 107 commercial or recreational operations. For CAWA holders, the airspace authorization is written right into the waiver itself, leveraging their public aircraft status. It drastically streamlines the time from that emergency call to actually getting the drone in the air.
That discussion about speed leads us directly into the capabilities this package waiver enables. So moving into advanced operations, when a public safety entity asks for a DFR waiver drone as a first responder, what is the core regulatory request the FAA actually hears and approves?
What the regulator hears is this. We want relief from the rule requiring the remote pilot to see and avoid other aircraft at all times.
So waiving 91.113.
Exactly. Waiving 91.113 for Part 91. The goal of the waiver is to enable BVLOS operations. It allows for systems like a fixed drone in a box deployment or rapidly deploying a drone in a truck concept where the pilot is focused on a screen, maybe miles away. The authorization really hinges on the operator proving they can mitigate the risk of collision equivalent to or, better than a human visually observing the airspace.
And the FAA established 2 standardized operational levels for this based on the risk profile and the necessary mitigation technologies.
Yes, and it's all focused on risk mitigation relative to manned aviation. The first is low altitude operation. This is typically under 200 feet AGL or within 50 feet of an object. In highly congested urban areas, operations at this level can often be conducted without visual observers or VOs.
And those get processed quickly.
Very quickly, because the inherent risk profile is just lower. Most manned aircraft do not operate consistently below 200 feet AGL in dense urban environments.
And the second level?
The second is the higher altitude operation, so up to 400 feet AGL or the UAS-FM grid height. This demands more sophisticated technical mitigations because you are operating at the typical height of general aviation traffic. This level generally requires adding certified electronic detect and avoid, or DAA, systems to satisfy those CMD DAA criteria we talked about earlier.
Wait, isn't that counterintuitive? You're telling me the waiver is easier to get in crowded urban airspace, which is often covered by the CAWA, than in empty rural airspace where the requirement for human VOs is imposed. How does the FAA defend that policy choice?
That is an excellent and a very common challenge to the rule. The FAA's reasoning, which is documented in our sources, centers entirely on aircraft participation and electronic visibility.
Okay.
So outside of typical urban mode C veils, where transponders are mandatory and airspace is tightly controlled, there is a significantly higher likelihood of encountering non-participating aircraft.
And by non-participating, you mean aircraft that aren't broadcasting their position electronically, like a small, privately owned fixed-wing plane or something.
Exactly that. Think of small general aviation aircraft, glider operations, or agricultural spray planes that might be operating low and are not required to have ADS-B out in those non-controlled rural environments.
Ah, I see.
Because that electronic safety net is incomplete in rural areas, the human element, the visual observer, is required to fill the gap left by those non-cooperating electronic aircraft. In contrast, congested urban airspace, while denser, is often more electronically predictable.
I see the regulatory strategy there. They're prioritizing electronic predictability over visual density. Even with all these new electronic DAA systems and waivers, the pilot's ultimate responsibility under 91.111 remains paramount.
Absolutely. Regulation 91.111, which dictates that the pilot must not operate the aircraft in a careless or reckless manner so as to endanger the life or property of another, that is not waived.
Never waive.
The pilot in command is always the final safety barrier for collision avoidance. And this leads to an important piece of manned aviation myth-busting that the FAA experts stress constantly in their guidance.
Please, elaborate on that myth-busting, particularly when it comes to low-flying manned traffic.
The myth is that manned aircraft only fly below 500 feet during an emergency. The truth, according to the FAA, is that public safety drone pilots must assume manned aircraft, medevac helicopters, police helicopters, small fixed-wing trainers, are always below 500 feet, and often right down to the surface as they're legally permitted to do.
And the anecdote about the near mid-air collision in El Paso really brings this risk home.
It does. It was a well-documented incident. A medevac helicopter, actively following air traffic control instructions, flew 100 feet below a drone that was conducting a standard construction site survey.
100 feet.
100 feet. The drone pilot was entirely focused on his screen, just relying on his knowledge of the grid altitude, and never physically saw the helicopter. If they had been just 100 feet closer vertically, it could have been catastrophic.
Wow.
The lesson is clear. Technology aids awareness, but it does not replace the fundamental responsibility of collision avoidance.
Shifting to operational requirements. The CAWA generally applies to aircraft under 55 pounds. What about the ability to practice and train under this public safety framework? That was a gray area for a long time.
It was. And now, training flights are explicitly allowed under the Part 91 CRW. This is a critical development.
Yeah.
Previously, there were severe legal restrictions and, conflicting interpretations regarding whether training constituted a governmental function.
Right.
A clear legal interpretation change that occurred around April 2024 finally settled this. It confirmed that the governmental function test only applies when there are humans aboard the aircraft. This removes a huge legal gray area for departments that are trying to maintain proficiency.
Finally, let's address operations over people, or OOP, which is the most risk-intensive scenario. What are the rules under the Part 91 CAWA for that?
Under the Part 91 CAWA, operating over people can only be done in a single defined situation,
Huh.
a life safety emergency.
So an immediate threat to life or property.
That's it. Once that emergency ends, the suspect is apprehended, the immediate threat is neutralized. The pilot must immediately cease operating over people and revert to VLOS or land.
And if it is a non-emergency operation over people, say surveying damage after the fact, then the Part 107 rules kick in, requiring physical mitigations.
Precisely. If it's a non-emergency, the organization has to treat the operation as a Part 107 flight over people. And this means the aircraft must either be a category-compliant drone, Cat 1 through 4, or be equipped with specialized physical mitigations.
Can you detail those physical requirements, focusing on that kinetic energy threshold?
Sure. For the smallest drones, those weighing up to 0.88 pounds, that's about 400 grams propeller guards, are deemed sufficient mitigation.
Okay.
For anything heavier, the physical requirement is a parachute recovery system that conforms to ASTM standard F332218 or newer.
Why that specific ASTM standard? What is it designed to test?
ASTM F332218 establishes really rigorous testing requirements. It ensures two things: rapid deployment reliability, and crucially that the parachute reduces the kinetic energy of the failing aircraft upon impact to an acceptable level.
And what's an acceptable level?
Specifically, a level that is statistically unlikely to cause serious injury or death. The FAA is moving toward demonstrable, quantifiable safety rather than just relying on generic equipment.
The liability perspective here seems key.
It is. Public safety organizations are mandated to reduce risk to the public. The policy essentially aims to avoid the horrific scenario where agents might kill one to save one due to negligence or lack of proper equipment. The decision to fly over people, even in an emergency, must be meticulously defensible by the pilot and the organization.
That discussion about physical mitigations and liability, it connects perfectly to how the FAA historically moves capabilities from a restrictive waiver environment into the standard rulebook. Let's chart the history of this evolution, starting with the friction that defined the pre-107 era.
The early days were defined by regulatory paralysis. Before Part 107 came into effect in August 2016, commercial and non-standard operators had to rely on Section 333 exemption.
Right, I remember those. They were slow.
Incredibly slow. They often required the applicant to hold a manned pilot certificate, and the review process was just all over the place, totally inconsistent.
That friction must have hampered the industry pretty significantly.
Absolutely. The Section 333 era created a massive bottleneck. It was preventing innovation and any kind of commercial scaling. Congress ultimately recognized this inefficiency and replaced that entire waiver pathway with the modern Section 44807 authority, which is what paved the way for the streamlined Part 107 framework.
So when Part 107 arrived in 2016, waivers became the essential pathway for advanced operations. Where did operators focus their requests?
The demand immediately clustered around two fundamental rules that were severely limiting commercial utility: 107.29, which prohibited night operations, and 107.31, the see and avoid requirement, which prohibited BVLOS. The sheer volume of requests for those two waivers clearly demonstrated to the FAA exactly what operational capabilities the industry needed to scale safely.
And this high volume of predictable safe waivers led directly to the great waiver-to-rule transition in 2021, often called the Subpart D changes. Why was this such a major inflection point?
This was the moment the FAA signaled its operational maturity regarding drones. The 2021 rule, effective May 17, 2021, took night operations, operations over people, OOP, and operations over moving vehicles, MV, and moved them completely out of the restrictive waiver domain and into the established rule structure, Subpart D.
So the philosophy became, if it's safe and repeatable, it should be a rule, not a waiver.
The regulatory philosophy was clear. If an operation can perform safely and reliably by many operators under a specific set of mitigations, those mitigations should become the rule.
How did night operations change specifically?
It was simplified dramatically. Night operations no longer generally require a waiver, provided the aircraft has anti-collision lighting that meets specific conspicuity standards. It has to be visible for at least 3 statute miles.
And the pilot needs training.
Crucially, yes. The pilot must also have documented night training. This change was so complete that all pre-existing night waivers were just canceled outright in May 2021. The risk was mitigated by rule, which eliminated the need for discretionary authorization.
And for operations over people, how did the FAA use the 2021 rules to de-risk that operation?
They introduced the 4 risk-based categories, Cat 1 through 4. This system is brilliant because it moves away from pilot restrictions and focuses instead on the aircraft's kinetic energy profile and its injury potential.
I see.
The FAA essentially said, if your drone is safe enough to meet the kinetic energy requirement of a specific category, you don't need a waiver. Waivers for OOP under 107.39 are now only needed if the aircraft is too heavy or too energetic to meet those 4 category safety thresholds.
So it places the burden of safety development on the manufacturer, which incentivizes safer drone design.
Exactly.
So post-2021, the focus for waivers shifted entirely to the truly complex, bespoke operations.
Correct. After 9 and OOP largely moved into the rulebook, the remaining primary waiver applications are centered on BVLS, 107.31, altitude greater than 400 feet AGL, 107.51, and multiple UAS operations, 107.35. These are the 3 pillars of complex aviation integration that are still in the waiver process.
So now we look to the horizon for the next big leap, the normalization of BVLOS. I understand the FAA has proposed a new regulatory framework to move BVLOS from a bespoke waiver to a standardized rule.
The FAA's AUG 7 2025 Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NPRM, proposes Part 108. This is the culmination of years of industry feedback and risk assessments. Part 108 aims to normalize BVLOS operations under a scalable, performance-based safety framework.
Okay, so a performance-based framework.
Right. And this new framework acknowledges that safe, scaled BVLOS operations require more than just the DAA system on the drone. It's also proposing new ground services, specifically Part 146 services for strategic deconfliction.
Strategic deconfliction, so automated air traffic management.
Essentially, yes. Automated air traffic management and UTM oversight that would allow hundreds of BVLOS drones to safely share airspace concurrently.
Let's analyze the implication of Part 108. If the goal is to replace this patchwork of individual BVLOS waivers with standardized rules, how does that shift the financial and operational burden for the industry?
It shifts it completely. Currently, the operational burden is on the individual waiver applicant to prove safety through rigorous data and testing, which is incredibly expensive.
Right.
Part 108 is meant to provide a clear, established standard. Once those rules are final, the financial burden shifts from proving the initial safety case to simply acquiring and using Part 108 compliant technology and those Part 146 services.
So the cost of entry will decrease, but the investment in certified performance-driven tech will go up.
Exactly, which ultimately allows the industry to scale exponentially. Waivers will then only be needed for truly novel use cases that fall completely outside the new Part 108 performance norms.
That discussion provides the necessary context for the operators who don't qualify for the standardized public safety CAWA and still have to navigate the Part 107 waiver process for advanced operations like BVLOS or altitude over 400 feet AGL. This requires a rigorous safety case built on data.
Indeed. The Part 107 process is far less templated than the CAWA. It demands the applicant meticulously prove equivalent safety to the regulators.
So tell us about the application mechanics. Where do operators file, and what are the crucial lead times they have to anticipate?
Waivers are filed exclusively in the FAA Drone Zone portal. And this is critical. Applicants must plan for a lead time of at least 90 days.
90 days.
At least. The SAA requires that window to review the technical details, assess the complex risk profile of BVLOS, and coordinate with air traffic control specialists for potential airspace integration.
And the application itself is constrained, right? It forces applicants to be concise.
That's the biggest hurdle. The waiver safety explanation is strictly limited to 15,000 characters, and you can only submit a maximum of 10 attachments, each capped at 20 megabytes.
Wow, that's tight.
It forces applicants to avoid prose and use precise language supported by high-quality, quantifiable evidence, like data plots or test reports. If the initial filing is incomplete or weak, it will be immediately rejected and returned, and that restarts the clock.
So what should the architecture of a strong safety case look like? It needs to mirror the technical analysis regulators are trained to perform.
A successful safety case should follow a robust, predictable structure. First, the concept of operations, co-NOPS. You've got to detail the who, what, where, when, and how, including detailed operational maps, geo-buffers, and altitude profiles.
And then the hazard log.
Second, and most vital, the hazard log. This is typically a table outlining every conceivable failure. You've got the hazard, the likelihood, severity, your mitigation, and then the residual risk.
So for BVLOS, that has to address things like lost link, GPS failure.
Exactly. For BVLOS, this table must explicitly address common high-risk failures: lost command and control, C2 link, GPS failure, DAA system failure, and airspace incursion by non-participating aircraft.
That brings us to the third part, mitigation evidence. What constitutes high-signal evidence that convinces a regulator the risk is truly mitigated?
This is the data. Mitigation evidence includes items like technical test cards, documented crew training records, and most critically for BVLOS, C2 reliability plots, and DAA detection trial results.
Okay, so C2 reliability plots, what do those actually show?
The C2 reliability plots, for instance, they have to show quantifiable data regarding link stability, specifically the dropout rate versus operational range, and the time required for automated systems to safely respond to a link loss event. This is where operators prove their system is trustworthy.
Got it. And the procedures?
Finally, clear written procedures are essential for normal contingency and emergency operations, like the exact step-by-step response to a lost link, a flyaway event, or an unpredicted airspace incursion.
And before any of this begins, one compliance item is mandatory, and the FAA is strictly enforcing it now: remote ID.
Remote ID, or Part 89, became fully enforced on March 16, 2024. Compliance is non-negotiable for registered aircraft operating outside of an FAA-recognized identification area, or FRIA.
And what specific item related to remote ID must a successful waiver application include?
The applicant must state their remote ID compliance path, whether it's a standard RA aircraft or an add-on module. And crucially, they must include an explicit failure plan.
A failure plan.
The regulator needs assurance that if the remote ID system ceases broadcasting, the pilot is prepared to act immediately. The accepted procedure is, if RA ceases, we land as practicable at the nearest safe location.
Finally, let's revisit airspace authorizations under Part 107, because this is a point of frequent operational confusion for even experienced pilots. The necessity of a two-track approval.
We have to emphasize that LANC is for airspace authorization. That's waiving 107.41 and is not the operational waiver, which might be waiving 107.31 for BFLOS. They are two distinct approvals issued under two distinct parts of the code.
So if I need to fly BVLOS, an operational waiver, and I need to fly inside the controlled Class D airspace of an airport, an airspace authorization, I need two separate concurrent approvals. Can you clarify those two steps?
Step 1. You file your operational waiver for BVLOS with that 90-day review through Drone Zone. Step 2. Once that operational waiver is granted, you must then secure the specific airspace authorization for that flight.
And you can't use LNC for that BVLOS flight.
Since LNC generally only covers standard VLOS operations up to the grid altitude, a complex BVLOS flight in controlled airspace often requires a separate manual airspace authorization request through Drone Zone, which is coordinated directly with air traffic control. The operation is illegal until both the operational waiver and the airspace authorization are approved and they align.
Analyzing the differences between the U.S. and Canadian systems provides some excellent insight into the core philosophical differences in regulatory risk mitigation, a real aha moment for the informed learner. Let's start with the foundational common ground.
Both nations share a fundamental safety framework. They both adhere to a 400-foot AGL maximum altitude baseline. They both require visual line of sight, VLOS, as the default operational standard, and they both mandate explicit authorization for controlled airspace access.
So they're starting from the same place.
They are. They're both integrating the same hardware. They just differ in how they manage the pilot and the operational risk.
The differences begin immediately with pilot certification. The U.S. chose simplicity. Canada chose a tiered complexity.
That's a great way to put it. The U.S. system is straightforward. A single remote pilot certificate under Part 107, minimum age 16. Canada's system reflects increasing operational competency linked to risk exposure.
So they have multiple levels.
They have a basic certificate, minimum age 14, an advanced certificate, minimum age 16, and the new Level 1 complex certificate, which is tied specifically to lower risk, defined to BVLOS operations, and requires a minimum age of 18.
Why did Canada prioritize a tiered license over the single U.S. license?
The Canadian approach is designed to reflect the increasing risk exposure associated with the type of operation, not just the weight of the drone. Basic operations are defined as far away from people and controlled airspace. Advanced requires more rigorous testing for operations near people, and the Level 1 complex recognizes the specialized knowledge required for remote BVLOS operations.
So it forces pilots to demonstrate specific skills and knowledge before they can even apply.
That's it.
And their respective controlled airspace authorization tools are different as well.
Yes. U.S. pilots use LANC. Canadian pilots use NAV Drone, which manages their RPA's flight authorizations, or RFA. Both systems serve the same purpose, providing quick automated review of proposed flights in controlled airspace.
Let's discuss the most significant regulatory disparities. Remote ID is a massive operational difference today.
Huge. In the U.S., remote ID is mandatory, and it's enforced. Operators have to broadcast their location and identification. In Canada, as of November 2025, there is still no national remote ID mandate.
Interesting.
While it is anticipated for future integration into their RTM-UTM framework, its absence currently means U.S. operators have to be cautious when planning reciprocal operations north of the border.
Operations over or near people, OOP, is another major philosophical split.
This is perhaps the best example of the differing risk philosophies. The U.S. system, Part 107 Subpart D, it focuses entirely on the kinetic energy risk the drone poses to the person on the ground.
Right, the categories.
If the aircraft's potential energy meets the injury criteria of Category 1, 2, 3, or 4, you operate by rule. The U.S. focuses on quantifying the survivability of an impact.
In Canada,
Canada's approach is tied to the aircraft's RPAS Safety Assurance Declaration, which is Standard 922 AC 922001. They permit operations near people down to 5 meters if the technical standard is met, and that focuses on airframe integrity and control system stability.
so they're more focused on the aircraft's reliability.
However, over people capabilities are highly model-specific and generally more restrictive than the U.S. kinetic energy framework. Canada prioritizes the reliability of the machine to prevent the failure in the first place, whereas the U.S. system focuses on mitigating the consequences if the machine fails.
That is a fascinating difference, reliability versus consequence mitigation. Finally, the paths to normalize BVLOS show where both countries are aiming for the future.
The U.S. is currently waiver-centric, but accelerating toward that standardized, performance-based Part 108 rule. Canada has been moving away from the cumbersome, highly discretionary Special Flight Operations Certificates, or SFOCs, toward their new Level 1 complex certification pathway.
So they're creating a by-rule path.
They're establishing a by-rule path for certain low-risk BVLOS operations, which is defined in their new rules, SOR 2025-70. Both nations are converging on the idea that prescriptive rules must eventually be replaced by performance standards that are proven by data.
So what are the key lessons we can learn from studying both systems?
The fundamental lesson is that risk thinking is universal. The U.S. focus on kinetic energy and the Canadian focus on safety assurance declarations, they both rely on the ability to quantify risk with rigorous data. Mastering the architecture of a safety case in one system, identifying hazards, calculating likelihoods, providing data, makes you a far more competent applicant in the other.
That makes a lot of sense.
And for future-proofing, operators should frame their U.S. waiver mitigations, their DAA concepts, their strategic deconfliction plans, in the language of the Part 108 NPRM. Similarly, Canadian operators need to anticipate that their system will adopt more quantitative risk measures. The best operators today approach both systems with a rigorous safety case lab mindset, constantly collecting the data that proves their equivalent or superior level of safety.
We've covered everything today, from the brand new expedited public safety CAWA waiving 9 critical regulations at once, to the deep history of U.S. regulatory evolution and how that stacks up against the tiered and consequence-focused Canadian system. The central theme that ties this entire deep dive together is clarity. The regulatory bodies are striving for standardized rules and predictable processes that enhance safety and enable crucial operations at scale.
The key takeaway is simple. Fly by rule first and waive only what is left. If you qualify for the Part 91 CAWA, use the simplified email-driven process with the short Cohen LLPS and ditch the old CCAPS system to gain your 4-year 9-rule waiver.
And for everyone else,
For all other advanced operations, especially under Part 107, ensure your safety case is meticulously robust, it's evidence-backed by performance data, and addresses the new reality of remote ID compliance and performance standards. The data you provide today is the foundation of the rules tomorrow. The speed of these new approvals demonstrates a growing trust between the regulator and the operators, especially public safety.
that trust is built entirely on the integrity of the data and the rigor the operator provides. As we move closer to a fully integrated, performance-based aviation environment, we have to consider the role of the pilot in that system.
If the future of aviation is performance-based, where safety is proven by data and automated systems rather than subjective human intervention, does the pilot's subjective see and avoid capability, the very rule BVLOS waivers seek to circumvent, ultimately become a limiting factor for expansion? Or does it remain the ultimate final safety valve when all the digital systems fail?
That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.